I could paint for 100 years, 1,000 years without stopping, and I would still feel as though I knew nothing. Artist Paul Cézanne. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. Jill Steenhuis is an American Impressionist painter originally from Atlanta, Georgia, who now lives in Aix-en-Provence, France. It's been her home now for over 3 decades. Her unexpected journey there is a fascinating story. When she was just 8 years old, her mother died. Her mother's death left an enormous void in her life. Being creative helped fill part of that void. When Jill turned 16, her father gave her a book of the paintings of Paul Cézanne. Now, at first, she was disappointed in getting that book. Like many young teens, she had hoped for a car. However, with the gentle encouragement of her father, she began to appreciate the beautiful paintings within. The inspiration from that book began an extraordinary journey that led to her living in Aix-en-Provence in France, falling in love with a young Frenchman, studying at the Marchutz School of Painting and Drawing, and following Cézanne's footsteps to his studio at Chateau Noir and Mont Sainte-Victoire. Jill's paintings are vibrant and colorful. Her loose brushstrokes invite the viewer into an intimate dance. Most of her paintings are created outdoors, en plein air. Each painting session begins with a warm-up. She carefully prepares and lays out her colors on a large white palette that she likens to a piano. Using her unlimited palette of colors, she has access to all 88 keys of her piano. With her large canvas set in place on her easel, her eye seeks out the nature that surrounds her. And then, she lifts up a paintbrush, and without hesitation, Jill Steenhuis begins her exuberant dance with nature. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Jill, appreciate you being on The Artful Painter. It's good to have you here. I'm talking to you, and you're in the town of Aix in France.
That's right. Aix-en-Provence.
You gave me a little bit of French lessons just before we started, so I would be sure to pronounce that name correctly, or at least as close as possible as it is for my southern tongue. So I appreciate that. But the first time I met you was very serendipitous. It was at an Olmsted plein air invitational event. I think it was in 2017. And I had signed up to attend a lecture by Clyde Aspevic. And so when I showed up, he wasn't there. His plane was delayed. And so Lillian told me, she says, well, you really want to listen to Jill. Jill's going to give a lecture instead. And you're going to really want to listen to this. I said, well, sure. Okay. I'll do that. And I did. And I am so glad that I did. You captivated me right from the beginning when you described your painting process as a dance with nature. I just thought, wow, this is going to be a great lecture. And it turned out to be very inspiring.
Thank you. Well, destiny is an amazing thing, and it is something that I believe in and something that has been the guiding force of my entire life, I would say.
One other thing I remember from that, you showed a video, and I went back and watched it earlier this week. I was enthralled with your approach to painting. And the video was very nicely done because there's really no narration in it. It's just the sound of nature and you setting up. You're setting up and you're ready to go. Your palette's laid out. And it's kind of like a tango almost, and then suddenly the brush comes out and whack.
Yes.
you hit the canvas. I said, oh my goodness, she hit the canvas. I love it. So you started this tango, as it were, with this painting surface. Tell me about that. Where does that come from?
I would say that I have three great influences in my life, and that is Van Gogh, Cézanne, and Rembrandt. Rembrandt has taught me the skill of drawing and painting in a sort of spiritual way. And Cézanne I was led to Cézanne 40 years ago to come to France and paint in the very town where he painted, which is Aix-en-Provence, and paint the very mountain he painted, Mont Sainte-Victoire. But it's Van Gogh that I discovered when I got here. Cézanne is, for me, like a austere grandfather, and Van Gogh has become like a soulmate. I've read all of his letters, and I have one little piece of a letter here that says that I've always adhered to. He says, "My brushstroke has no system at all. I hit the canvas with irregular touches of the brush, where I leave them where they are, patches of thickly laid on color, spots of canvas left uncovered, here and there portions that are left absolutely unfinished, repetitions, savageries. In short, I am inclined to think that the art historians will think that I am crazy." My great line about how I feel about my process is, I say, nature is my dancing partner, and we are waltzing together to bring into being a new poetry, one of sound and movement and wild brushstrokes and freedom of spirit, one that speaks of eternity. But what about you? You, Carl Olson, what about you? Where are you in my dance? You are there, waiting for the new. You are waiting to receive my work and have your own poetic reaction to complete the dance.
Well, may I have this dance?
Yes, off we go. We're going to dance together and understand about art. Art is not just a private thing that the artist does all by himself. Art is something to be meant to be shared with the viewer. And for me, the viewer counts a great deal in my dance.
So how is that? Let's expand upon that. I sometimes I do hear that, painters want to paint for themselves. And I've often kind of been at odds at that, because if I only painted for myself, it implies that no one would see what I've done and interacted with me as an artist. I like a measure of interaction. That's my take on it. What's your take on respecting the viewer, involving the viewer in your paintings? How do you do that?
Well, I feel that it's very important that I do not do a copy of nature. I do not do a professional photographic copy of nature. So therefore, I never, ever use photographs in my work. I am out there having my dance with nature. And the result should be what Cézanne taught me, moitié humaine, moitié divine. The result needs to be half human, half divine, meaning that I receive the mysteries of nature. Somehow, each time when I'm out there, nature reveals a mystery to me that goes into my canvas, and I receive it. And then I don't keep it for myself. I have the interaction with the viewer playing a role in my dance. How is that? It is that I leave the mystery. I do not paint the painting until I have painted out all the mystery and given over every detail that is in front of me. No, I suggest instead of state. I leave unfinished instead of completing. Therefore, the viewer can come to the work and complete the dance themselves and play a role in the dance. They interact with my brushstroke, so I don't smear and mash out the brushstroke so that it looks like the building or it looks like the rock. No, I leave the energy of my brushstroke so that it is an engaging entry for the viewer. It's kind of like what Hemingway said when he was writing during the minimalist period, and he was at a party after he won the Nobel Prize, and a writer critic went up to him and said, "Mr. Hemingway, can you write me a story in fewer than 10 words?" And he said, "Yes, come to me after the party and I'll have it for you." He came to him after the party and he said, "Here's my story. It's 6 words." For me, these 6 words are what I'm trying to do in my painting by not giving it all there, all to the viewer, just having a dance with the viewer. And the 6 words are: for sale, baby shoes never worn.
Oh, wow. I have
Right.
not heard that.
Right. So you just said, oh, wow. So you just created your own story to go with his. You
Yeah.
just had a dance with Hemingway. That's the way it is.
Well, the way I look at it, I use the phrase a tango. I don't know.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So, because there's energy in it, but it involves a partner. If you didn't have a partner in a tango, you'd just be, I don't know, breakdancing, I guess. You're out there performing by yourself. So you've invited a partner in to view this painting. And I like this idea of having mystery left in it so that I can fill in the blanks. The mind is amazing at interpolating things and imagining things when something is suggested. So your paintings are very, they are very energetic, and being able to see the process, you're energetic in your approach, and you paint your stage, your dancing floor, as it were, is quite large. You're not doing very small paintings. These are relatively large substrates that you've set up outdoors, and so it's impressive to me the speed at which you're laying those marks down on there, and your painting strokes are loose, which is something a lot of artists want. You'll hear that question: how can I be more loose in my brush strokes? But there you are, you're using these loose brush strokes. So how does that loose brush stroke play in to creating this mystery or this interaction with a viewer?
For me, the loose brushstroke is the dance. First of all, to paint a loose brushstroke rather than the contrived, calculated one takes a certain amount of faith in that brushstroke that it will stay. And as Cézanne said, the first brushstroke is the one you keep. So that's another thing that artists tend to go back and go over and over and over those brushstrokes until they've painted out all the poetry. The loose brushstroke is the one that gives forth the idea of the wind. It gives forth the idea of the spirit. It gives forth the invisible in painting. My son has just done a documentary on me called Painting the Invisible. Part of painting the invisible, how do we paint the invisible?
Well, let me ask you this. Is that video available right now?
It will be available in 2 weeks.
Nice.
The trailer is available right now.
Okay.
And Olmsted posted it 2 or 3 days ago, and I think they've gotten lots of views on it. It's a 3-minute trailer.
Painting the Invisible. I'll provide a link in the show notes for this episode. Okay.
Great. That would be great. He has worked 3 years on it. He studied film at King's College in London and came home, and he did many quick videos for artists on their creative process. And then for the past 3 years, he's been working on this documentary on his mother.
Wonderful.
But the loose brushstroke is the one that reveals the invisible. And of course, what is the artist trying to do in the first place? We have a 2-dimensional flat surface that has no light and no dark. The magic of the artist is to give movement and the illusion of space to that 2-dimensional surface. The darks that you put on the canvas suddenly allow the light to exist. The darks give birth to the light. The canvas becomes alive, and the viewer all of a sudden perceives movement and space. So my choice of subject matter would, we have a choice in life. Destiny comes to us and gives us what it gives us, but we have a choice to go this way or that way. So when my almond tree is in bloom in our yard, and it's in perfect bloom, I prefer to wait until the petals begin to fly off the almond tree at the end of the blooming time, like confetti all over the place, going into the sky.
Why is that?
Those petals, because of the movement of the petals flying in the sky like confetti or like snow coming. And to me, I get very excited about my dance with the almond tree, with the petals flying everywhere, so that my canvas is not just a static portrait of a perfectly beautiful flowering almond tree in the sunlight. I would prefer to have the dance of the petals flying around and that sensation of music and dance with the petals moving across my canvas.
We've talked a lot about a dance and music, but when you paint, you're not listening to music. The only sound is nature. Is that correct?
That's correct. I need to take in nature through my senses to avoid using my intellect, which will calculate it into a boring human-controlled rectangle. The dance begins with asking myself, what are my sensations? Of course, sensation has to do with senses. So I ask myself, what do I smell, taste, hear, see, and feel that's in front of me? And I open my senses by creating my palette, doing a drawing, and becoming a friend to what I'm about to paint, or a friend to my new dancing partner. I have to take a little bit of contemplative time opening my senses to receive what is there before me. And then, just like my male partner, which is almost always my husband, nature extends its hand and invites me in through the contemplative process, through my senses. And then the dance begins with brushstrokes, dancing onto the canvas. I don't paint one section of the canvas in the top left-hand corner and proceed to the bottom right-hand corner. The bottom right-hand corner would never have anything to do with the dance up in the left-hand corner. No, my dance is all over the canvas. Cézanne said the first 20 brushstrokes should be in the sky, in the earth, in the rooftop, and in the mountain. And we build up those masses of light and dark, warm to cool, horizontal to vertical, until poof, it becomes the sky, the earth, the house, and the tree, with brushstrokes having divined it, and the result is a more beautiful poetry than if we set out to paint the object itself.
You know what it reminds me of is a lot of cinema back in the late 60s and early 70s would use these long establishing shots, and it's just a blur. It's just you'd see a sparkle of light, a patch of color, but then the focus would slowly resolve. So the whole rectangle of the film, that cinemascope, would finally resolve into this mysterious scene that became the opening of the scene. So I think of that as you're laying down those strokes all over the canvas. It's beginning to come into just enough focus to give an impression of what it is, what the dance is, what the subject is.
That's it. Yeah. And Cézanne said, he said, the end result, he said, art exists to make one taste the eternal. He used a sense to taste rather than to find the eternal. He said to taste the eternal, that art exists, whether you're painting or creating art or whether you're viewing art, you should be going away on a higher plane than before you created or viewed the art, because the art should give you a taste of the eternal. What does he mean there? He means that the art piece or the creative process, either one, should give us a taste of what's beyond the physical object, and something intemporal, something long-lasting, something that is going to stay with us a long time. Like maybe baby shoes never worn, for sale, baby shoes never worn. You could take that and make many stories out of that, of your own stories, and it stays with you for a long time because it's poignant.
Well, here it is, 2020, and we're still relating that story.
That's right. Reiterate about never using a photograph as a prop or a help, because I feel that so many people do. And I think that the moment you enter into having a photograph to help you, you are referring to your intellect. And there's no way you can smell, taste, feel, hear, see nature and that's what opens your soul to the creative process and to creating something that is half human, half divine. We open our soul. And to paint after a photograph, or even if some people do a beautiful photograph and they send it through the computer and they can have what we call a giclée come from a machine. The photograph is a beautiful form of art that great photographers master, and that's great. That's their medium. But a painter needs to stay with the paint and the paint going onto the canvas. And it's not important if it's exactly right. Cézanne and Van Gogh, their early work was very awkward and kind of dark. They didn't show any promise of becoming Cézanne, the father of modern art, and Van Gogh, probably the most famous artist in our times, that even a 5-year-old would say that Van Gogh is their favorite artist. They were not painting early on in exact likenesses and perfect renditions of nature. And I think it's their poetry, their awkwardness, their searching and their seeking and their humble way. Cézanne said, "I have hair and a beard longer than my talent."
So do you think he was lamenting his lack of ability to, at that time, to be able to render a painting in the way that his peers were doing at that time? Or was he searching for a new way to express that?
I think he what he believed in was the many hours that you put in to create. And he believed in his senses. So he did paint Mont Sainte-Victoire, the mountain in our area, over 100 times. And the last painting that he did of the mountain is a very spiritual version of the mountain. One of the very first views of the mountain that he did probably 35 years before, the mountain is kind of an appendage in the distance. And it's in a beautiful scene. As the years went by and as he painted it more and more and more, he became, like the Zen master said, go out and observe the bamboo for 10 years, become a bamboo yourself, and then paint. Cézanne became the mountain, and the mountain became him. They became one, and they are inseparable. But he actually even studied a bit of geology to understand about the rock and the stone. And it was his muse, but his soul went into the mountain. He received the soul of the mountain himself.
So he was into geology. I did not know that.
Yes.
I've talked to a few artists on this show who are influenced by geology as well, because it enhances their powers of observation, the connection with the earth and nature. It covers eons of time that just covers billions of years. And so they're the geology and the lay of the land. But I did not know that Cézanne was too. So thank you for telling me that. This enhances my appreciation for him as an artist there. I love geology too, so I'm kind of partial. I'm a little biased.
The stone and geology, it's very monumental. And I find his work has a monumentality to it. And he loved his painter friends in Paris, the Impressionists, and he wanted to find his own way, have his own poetry, and not copy what they were doing. He was aware that Monet was painting the fleeting moment with all of the different versions of the Cathedral of Rouen in morning light, in evening light, in the rain, foggy light, all different lights, and it was the fleeting moment. He said, I want to paint something that is long during, like art exists to make one taste the eternal, something that would last forever. So he didn't really, he let Monet do that. He let Monet paint the fleeting moment, but he wanted to paint the timeless art.
So he found his voice.
He did. And his way of finding it was to paint inlassablement, sans cesse. He said, I must paint without ceasing. So he said, if you have 90% talent and only 10% discipline, you will go nulle part. You will go nowhere. If you have 90% discipline and only 10% talent, he said you can be hanging in the Louvre, in the museums.
That's inspiring.
So he very much adhered to, and Van Gogh the same, of the many hours it takes to paint and become confident with that loose brushstroke, that let the first brushstroke be the one you keep. And Vincent said, if I could just get this figure on here with fewer than 10 brushstrokes, I will be happy. But how many did he have to do in order to get to the point where he could get that figure walking down the road in Tarascon in fewer than 10 brushstrokes? It takes lots of time to paint and be okay about failing.
I like to use the word experimental. I don't think they use that phrase then, but I like to use experimental. I got to see what happens when I do this. What happens when I violate this precept that's been handed down for generations of, okay, if I go outside the lines, what happens with this?
I think experimentation is a good word, and I think it's important to do that. And I think also that if people looked at my work after I have those first 20 brushstrokes on the canvas or the first 50 brushstrokes, it does look like an abstract, nonsensical piece of art. Of course, I see and perceive a little bit of where I'm going, but the whole object is for me to let go, I constantly have words in my mind. Jill, let go. What am I letting go of? I'm letting go of the control, the reins. I'm allowing something to happen from the senses, igniting something in my soul. And through the years, 40 years of painting and practice and experimentation, my paintbrush goes to the palette and onto the canvas, and the dance begins. I don't know always how the dance is going to end up. And sometimes at the end of a session, I come down off of a high or off of a place where I had no concept of time or many other things that could have been maybe bothersome to someone were not to me, because I was just in this, I was a funnel between my nature, God, my soul, and the canvas. And the dance began, and I danced. So the result of it is not always something that the painter likes, because we did let go and we come down off of that high, and our intellect sometimes is blind to the beauty that we just created. And so that's when the danger comes. If an artist wants to fix things and paint this and fix this, they have to be careful, because that could be the masterpiece right then and there. And that should be the moment when you stop.
Do you keep all your paintings?
Yes, I wait. I don't come home and wash off a painting with turpentine, or if I do, it's extremely rare. I've accepted to be able to throw canvases away at a certain time of year, maybe twice a year, go through my canvases and sort out when that moment of grace did not come. You know, does Bjorn Borg play tennis perfectly every time he plays? Are we on par? Are we letting go? Are we letting go of our to-do list? Are we letting go of our calculations every single time we go out to paint? No, we are not. And so sometimes we come home with failure.
I agree. Yeah, you got to have a point of reflection. You got to say, let me sleep on this. You know?
That's right.
Yeah, and then come back and look like, so okay, well, that really wasn't as bad as I thought, or maybe there's an interesting way that we're going here that can use more development. So when Cézanne first started painting Mont Sainte-Victoire, what fascinates me about this is I'm just curious about. So his first painting, the mountain perhaps was in the background, as it were, but over the 35 years, the mountain became, I think you used the word, the monument. It became a feature. It became the subject. So it evolved over time as he painted.
It became the essence of his painting, the essence. And I'll tell you how art works. This is the power of art. I grew up, my mother died when I was 8 years old, and I grew up going to the summer camp she went to because my father wanted to take us, for us to know my mother by going to the camp she went to. And at that camp, I received all the love that I needed. the girls, the dancing in the gym, the singing, the beauty looking out over the brow of Lookout Mountain. And so my mother went there in the 40s during World War II. She was a little girl. And then after her death, I went there in the 70s. My father sent me there, and I was a tomboy, and I adored that camp. And that's where I learned about faith, reading the Bible, and having a walk down the road to go to my activity. I could actually be having a conversation with God. As a child, it was nothing fancy. It was just a way that they were teaching at camp. And I embraced it because I had a void in my heart. I had no mother with me, and this was my connection with her. So I embraced the mountain, and I went off to college. And in college, I discovered in the art history classes I took this painter that painted a mountain. And that final painting, mountain painting of Mont Sainte-Victoire that Cézanne did, touched my heart. I said, this painter knows what the power of a mountain is.
That was his Lookout Mountain.
That was. And I told my father, he asked me what I wanted for my graduation gift from college with my studio art degree from Sweetbriar College in my pocket. And he came forward with a plane ticket to go to the south of France and see the very mountain that Cézanne had painted and enter this painting school that taught in the tradition of Cézanne. So through art, through my soul connecting with the mountain and getting what I needed as a child that I needed because I didn't have my mother, and it protected me all through college to find my way. Then through that and through the power of the spirituality of the final mountain that Cézanne painted, I was led to the south of France to discover him, to discover his art in a deeper way, to discover the mountain, and to be able to paint the mountain myself. And now, 40 years later, I'm still here. That's the power of art. Something spiritual was speaking to me through his painting that changed the rest of my life.
You have me speechless there, Jill. You see what you did.
Good.
Well, you stop that old yapper.
Well, that comes back to why I have so much regard for the viewer, because I was the viewer of Cézanne's work, and it changed me. It gave me solace. It gave me direction. It gave me purpose and meaning to my life. And that was because I took part in his dance through his painting. So if he'd been painting in his corner his whole life and his paintings never got out there for me to see, I would be a different person right now. I might be a stockbroker in Atlanta, Georgia.
How old were you when you were in Mentone?
It was actually the 60s and 70s. So it was the year of 69 to the year of 68, 69. Those summers all the way to 1980. It must have been 69 to 79. I went to the camp for 10 years, 7 as a camper and 3 as a counselor.
When my children were younger, we used to camp in DeSoto State Park, which was not too far from there.
Yeah. Well, my boys, I have 3 sons and no daughters, but they all were born and raised here in the south of France. But every summer, I sent them to Alpine Camp for boys, all the way from the south of France to Mentone, Alabama for their boys' camp.
Oh, wow.
Well, I think sometimes people get so much into the technique, the composition, the perspective, and the this and the that they, it's good to ask yourself, why am I doing this? what is behind all, what is the reason? What's the purpose? What's the meaning? And I have strong feelings about that.
So should we be concerned with technique at all?
I think we should. I liken it to your child that goes to school in first grade, or you, when you went to first grade, had to learn how to read or write. You had to learn how to make the round ball and put a little tail on it to make an A. And you went through every letter of the alphabet, and then you put them all together and you learned how to do cat and cake and mouse and all the sounds. And you had to learn those things. But I think as fast as you can pick the way to work with paint or work with your medium and get those basic techniques down, then you need to go and just practice it. Practice. I do enjoy dancing, really dancing on the dance floor with my husband, and I have my way of dancing. And someone said to me, do you take lessons? And I said, well, I took a few lessons. We took a few lessons back in the day, but it's been many years since then. And they said, well, you should never take another lesson because it could take away your originality in your dance.
That's beautiful. I like that. Yeah. I mean, sometimes we have a preconceived notion of this is the way it must be done. Mm-hmm. But yeah, really the techniques, the skills that we learn, drawing, color mixing, and those things, they're foundational tools to help us express ourselves. So did your style develop? Did your approach to painting develop early, or is there an evolutionary process there? Your paintings are very exuberant and colorful. They're full of life. I just I love your paintings. They're really nice. But did you always paint that way, or did you have a journey in discovering where you are today?
That's a good question. I guess when I was at Sweetbriar, we learned all the techniques of painting and in the whole history of art and the whole history of painting. Like we made our own gesso, we made our own pigments, we painted an encaustic, we painted a fresco. We did the whole history of art and painting, and then we learned how to paint like the Cubists painted, and the Pointillists and the Fauvists, and we did a still life using only white eggs on a white tablecloth in a white basket with white plates. And how do you do that? So I learned all these different techniques. And I felt when I graduated from my 4-year degree with my Sweetbriar diploma in studio art that I felt maybe a little more like a scientist than a painter. I hadn't really developed my own art, I was mastering the technique, I would say. Then I went off to Aix-en-Provence to the painting school, the Leo Marchutz School of Painting and Drawing. And they just said, the way to paint is to paint, to practice your painting. Well, thankfully, I had all those techniques before because the Marchutz School hardly taught techniques. They just taught the 90% discipline is way more important than the 10% talent. And they didn't even ask if you had talent. So we just went out to the landscape every day and painted all day long. And it became a practice. I felt that first year, I almost felt like a monk in a monastery that prays all the time. I just painted and painted and painted. And I understood how my eyes became educated. My eyes became attuned and educated to nature. And then it's almost like watching your child grow up. How did you know that child was going to grow up and be like this? Did you know that your child was going to become this or become that? And how he was going to look. He came from my womb, but I had no control after that. And I feel that that's the way that my painting, once I got to France and once I was put in nature and told to let go of the intellect and take in nature through the senses, then I listened to nature. And here in the south of France, we don't have rain like you have in Atlanta, Georgia. We have wind. And the wind for me goes into my painting. And I hear the swish of the garlic reeds swishing together. I can hear the chant of the African workmen pulling up the garlic and binding it into 1 kilo bundles and putting it onto the tractor. And I smell the earth and I feel the sun on my skin. And I see the sway of the cypress trees bending into a new form that goes onto my canvas. all of this is coming to me like a new language, and the language is becoming more and more a part of me and my way of expressing, just like coming here and not being able to speak a word of French. Now I speak French with an enormous Southern American accent.
Isn't that wonderful?
French people can hear me a mile away and know that it's me. It's Jill Steenhuis.
Oh, I think that's wonderful.
My accent speaks of my roots, and I think my brushstroke speaks of my roots. My father, having to raise 4 daughters, I was the oldest, 8 years old, and the youngest was only a year and a half old when my mother died. And he just threw us all on a horse and took us fox hunting every weekend in North Georgia. So it's just that I was out in nature all the time as a child, on horseback and fishing in our little lake. And all of this, I think my spirit grew, and I had a strong kinship with nature. And when I got here in France, I went running with it.
I can't even begin to imagine what a transformation that was to go from North Georgia to Provence. That would have been a transformative event for myself if I'd done that.
It was a big risk for me to go off to the south of France, not having French in my repertoire, and to go to a place so far away from my father, who I adored. But my passion for art and my passion for Cézanne in particular made it be such a positive adventure. So my love, I think the inner love for art and for Cézanne took me there. And then, as destiny would have it, my second day in the south of France, I met this French guy, a year older than me, in the streets of Aix. And we've been married now for almost 40 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he spoke no English and I spoke no French. And destiny just brought him forward, served him up for me.
Wow, what a story! I love a good love story. So that's nice. I want to explore something just a little bit because I'm just curious. If I were to go back in time, here you are at the Leo Marchutz School. He very much followed in the footsteps of Cézanne and his approach. And I would be really curious if I could see your first paintings. How would they look? How would they look compared to what you do today?
My early work was, I would say, a little tentative, a little timid, but really, really trying to hear nature. And so the brushstrokes are not bold and sure, but there's a spirit in my work. I think that my colors were more gray, more watery, and not watery, but you use the medium to thin out your paint. And so I used a lot of medium, almost like as if I was painting watercolor on a canvas. But so I allowed the light of the canvas to show through, and my colors were very thin washes, and the light of the canvas showed through. So there is a certain light and spirituality and unity to the other work, to the early work. But then as I progressed, I think I became more that faith moment where you begin to have more and more faith in yourself and in your brushstroke, and leaving that first brushstroke to exist because of all the years of work behind you.
You're not afraid to let the canvas show through a painting.
Oh, no, I'm not. And that's one thing I learned from Cézanne, that he painted all brushstrokes to give birth to the light. And the lightest light on that final Mont Sainte-Victoire painting he did, if you look, your eye goes to one place. Everybody's eye goes to one place, and that's the peak of the mountain where it penetrates the heavens of the sky. And on that peak of that mountain, there is not one single brushstroke. Every brushstroke exists to make that light be the purest, most divine, translucent light, untouched and pure.
You are adept at many mediums. I noticed on your website that you have not just oil paintings, but you work with lithography, pastel, you draw, watercolors.
Yes.
Do you do those equally, or is there a preference, or how do you choose one medium over the other?
I learned early on that drawing is essential. You must maintain your drawing skills in order for your paintings to be strong. So I draw and paint, oil paint constantly. But in the wintertime, when it's very cold outside and the wind is whipping around out there, then I get going on putting my drawing on the stone. I have about 150 lithographic stones that I inherited from the Leo Marchutz school. Well, Leo Marchutz's son gave me Leo's press and his stones, and I draw directly on the stone and then print from the stone. And I usually do that process in January, February, and sometimes in March. So that's kind of a winter process. The pastels and watercolors, I do. Probably it has to do with the amount of time that I have. If I have a Cézanne tour, or Van Gogh tour, or a museum talk to do, or something else going on in the day, and I don't have enough time to with my painting gear, oil painting gear, then I can always have time to do pastels and watercolors anywhere I go, and it's not as much gear to take with me. So that's sporadic.
So Jill, you travel a good bit with your art making. So you've got some tips on how to make that a more less painful experience.
I always have my painting bag ready to go. Everything is in it. I do my inventory frequently, maybe at night after dinner, just to make sure I don't want to leave without having every single tube color that I need, just in case I might need some more Naples yellow, or I might need some white. I don't want any excuse to be in the way of me not being able to create with freedom of mind, freedom of spirit.
What colors do you choose to take with you when you travel?
I understand that many painters teach the limited palette. I am the opposite. I teach the unlimited palette. So
I like this better already. Come on.
I like to do things that others are not doing, so they can teach that, and that's wonderful. And I think it's a wonderful
There's benefit
workshop
to it, certainly, yeah.
But I have the unlimited palette, so I say I'm like Liszt, the composer Liszt. I play up and down the piano, down to the lowest
you use
bass
all
to the
88 keys.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I at least want them to be there so that in case I need to use them. Yeah. So I have 14 colors. I could probably reduce it. Really, I can get by with 12 or probably 10. But anyway, I like having the 14 colors. I like to have a warm red and a cool red, a warm yellow and a cool yellow, and a warm blue and a cool blue plus white. That would be essential. So that's 7 colors. And then I have 7 more colors that are colors that Van Gogh and Cézanne used in their paint orders that they would send to Paris.
What would those be?
Well, one of them is a color that's very difficult to find in America, but you see it in a lot of Cézanne and Van Gogh's paintings, almost every single one, and that is Veronese vert, Veronese green, which is difficult to find in America, but it does come in Winsor Newton, in Sennelier, and in Rembrandt. I use Rembrandt paints. I've been using Rembrandt paints for 40 years, and they've consistently been very fine and very good quality. So I get Veronese vert. Veronese green is a sort of clover leaf green, I would say.
It's got a bit of a gray in it, I guess, a bluish gray.
No, it's more just I'm not sure what Viridian is because I don't use that, but maybe it's a Viridian with white in it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I do gray the Veronese green with red, of course. Each color that I put out on my canvas, on my palette, is I start with, the red, the cool red, and then it goes toward the blue. So I mix my own purples, a red purple and a blue purple, and then I get to the blue, and then I mix a whole gamut of greens, the blue greens, the green greens, the lemon greens, the lime greens, and then it gets to the yellow, and then I mix different oranges and earth tones to get back to the other side of the wheel to my warm red. that makes like a rainbow across my palette, the top edge of my palette. And then I have the white in the middle. And then I have a whole gamut of grays that I've mixed to be ready. So that's my piano of notes of color. And I could mix that the night before I go to bed and then spend about 15 or 20 more minutes before I start my painting to mix specific colors for that. If I'm painting in the sea, which are a lot of blues, or if I'm painting in the flower market of Aix-en-Provence, which is lots of bright colors. If I need a few more reds or a few more pinks or a few more of this and that, then I will mix those on the spot according to if I'm in the field with lots of greens or golden colors from the wheat and the garlic.
And then you mix your specialty notes on location, depending on the needs of the location.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So the part about mixing the standard palette can be done the night before I go to bed, which gives me a really good sleep because it's a very contemplative thing to sit there with your palette and mix your colors and get it ready. But also in the morning when you wake up, if you want to have a contemplative time and you just want to be, instead of sitting on a rock, sitting and practicing silence, you could be there with your palette knife, mixing away. So I mix it. It takes me probably 45 minutes to mix that palette, but then I have it. And that is what helps me to go fast. Once I'm in front of my motif with my canvas, I no longer have to worry about my piano notes. I mean, a pianist needs the notes. And then think of Monet. And he was blind at the end of his life, but his daughter-in-law, his stepdaughter, put the colors out exactly where he had put them his entire life. So he knew where to go, even though he was blind, and he painted the greatest masterpieces of his life, the lily paintings, at the end of his life when he could hardly see. Think of Beethoven composing the 7th, 8th, and 9th symphonies, and he was deaf because he knew what those tones and notes on the piano sounded like. He made music even more beautiful from his delving into his soul to create music. And if those piano notes had been changed and put in a different place, like the computer, when you type on a computer clavier keyboard in America, and then these people that come to my workshops and want to send a message home to their husbands, and they type on my keyboard in France, and all the letters are in a different place. The A and the Q are changed, and you have to shift up for the period. It's like being blind or deaf when you're painting. You can imagine if all the letters on your keyboard of your computer were in a different place, how long it would take you to do. So my palette must be pre-prepared so that I may do my dance in a very fast way so that my intellect does not intervene.
I thought of another analogy with that as you were talking about it. It seems like it's a warm up almost. You know, my nephew was a lead dancer for the Atlanta Ballet for many, many, many years, and I used to enjoy going to the performances there. And one of the most enchanting things was when you're waiting for the show to begin, is the preparation. You hear the warm ups and the scales and all the instruments being warmed up, the mouthpieces being warmed up. You know, It was an enchanting moment to have that warm-up, and then the performance began. Everything came together, and the performance began, and it was flawless. It just absolutely flawless. It was wonderful.
That's exactly it. That just gives me chills, you telling me that, because that's what I try to teach in my workshops of people coming to my workshops about how important it is to take that bridge over into the creative world. You leave this bridge, you leave on the other side, you're on the other side of the bridge, you start mixing your palette and you get to the other side of the bridge and then you're ready to create. So to mix my palette, I have those 14 colors out on my palette and I take each color and, for example, the cobalt blue, I put a little smidgen of orange into the cobalt blue. I liken it to, do you like salt in your potatoes? Or
Absolutely.
do you like, yeah. I mean, have you ever had rice with no salt?
Not a pleasant experience.
It's not. And so you need to get that much salt into your blue and that much salt into your orange. Not too much, because if you do too much, you lose your blue and then you have a gray. And it's good to have gray, but if you want to have a blue, you just put the tiniest bit of salt. If you put too much salt, it's too salty. So you put a little smidgen of orange into the blue, a little smidgen of blue into the orange, a little smidgen of a little bit of salt into your red, which is the green, and a little smidgen of green into your red, and a little smidgen of yellow into the purple, and a little smidgen of purple into the yellow. And so that by the end of your palette mixing, every color is speaking to every other color, because every color has a little tiny bit of the other color. So it's a full-bodied, harmonious, unified color palette.
I noticed in the videos that I watched of you painting in Provence, you're using a French easel, but you have laid out on top of the French easel. You're not using the actual palette area of the French easel. You've got this big white palette laying on the easel. Is that what you travel with, or is that just something you use locally?
No, that is what I travel with. I have to have the large palette. It's my piano is a full-bodied piano of notes. And so my husband makes these palettes. We actually sell them. A lot of people who come to my workshop go home with one of my palettes, but they're made out of PVC.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A big of PVC, and he saws it or whatever he does to make it. He uses the palette format, and I've been using these palettes for years and years that he makes. I provide one for each one of the workshoppers that comes to do my workshop. And everybody is just hooked once they use these palettes, because the paint just slides on and off. When you need to clean your palette at the end, it's so slick and so nice, and they never break like plexiglass or anything. The PVC is much stronger than plexiglass. And I say that you must paint on a white palette if you are painting on a white canvas. Now, if you're painting on a tinted canvas, then you should paint on a tinted palette. Color is the color that it is according to what it's sitting next to. So if you have a raw sienna on a white palette, and then you put the raw sienna on your white canvas, it will be the same as what you saw on your palette. But if you put a raw sienna on a linen canvas that is transparent primed linen canvas, the color of linen, beige, and you put raw sienna on that, it's not going to look the same color as it was on the white palette. So you would be better off painting on a wooden palette in that situation.
Interesting. Because I've heard so many different opinions on that, and I've experimented with different ways. I haven't settled. I'm probably closer to what you're saying than I've ever been.
Well, it's logical. I mean, It's just logical. A color, sometimes at night when I'm mixing my colors, and I mix all my grays, and I like to put my colors in a sort of do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, do, going up the scale. And so the grays go from the white into a cream, into a light gray, into a medium gray, into a dark gray. And so they go up the scale. Do, re, mi, fa. Well, at night, sometimes with the yellow light of artificial light, I can't really see exactly what color that gray is. But certainly, if you put that gray on a tinted surface, it would not be the same gray that it is on a white canvas. So it's just logical. Whatever you're using to paint on, you need to be able to see the color on your palette, how it will be seen when you place it on your canvas.
Well, we started off talking about some tips. These are great. I love what you've shared here. So, but you're traveling with all this stuff. So you said you had a couple of tips for that.
So I have a Tupperware box, so just an open box that has my 14 colors in it at the bottom of my paint basket. And then I have my recycled turpentine to wash my brushes in a juice bottle. And then I have my medium. My medium is in another bottle. And my medium that I make is a mixture of poppy seed oil and bi-rectified turpentine, or, the high quality turpentine. And it's 40% poppy seed oil to 60% turpentine. And I shake it up like a vinaigrette. And then I have it in that bottle to pour into my medium cup that it attaches to my palette. So I need my medium cup. And then I need my palette knife to be able to keep mixing. And sometimes I use a palette knife when I'm painting to add a white at the end or something. But for the most part, I use paintbrushes because I like the sensualness of a paintbrush stroke. Just like I use my senses and I ask myself, what are my sensations? And I like the sensualness of the curve of a brushstroke and the calligraphy and the signature of my paintbrush stroke is mine. I find that if I see 10 people painting with 10 palette knife paintings, it looks like the same person did all 10. It's hard to see the calligraphy or the poetry of that individual person. When I see Van Gogh's painting, I know it's a Van Gogh. When I see Cézanne, I know it's a Cézanne. I can see them across the room in the Louvre or in the Musée d'Orsay, and I can go straight for this Van Gogh. I don't have to go look and see who signed, who did that painting. Well, that's what an artist seeks in their career as a painter, is to find their own language, their own signature, their own calligraphy. And the palette knife does not show that. So I can use the palette knife as like a 16th brush. It's a tool that I'll use, but I also use it to mix my paint. So I need my palette knife, and then I need a whole gamut of brushes. I have maybe, 16 or 20 brushes, and they're all just in tubes that I made, from tubes. And so I have the brushes, the palette knife, the paints in the Tupperware box, and the turpentine in the medium. And then I have paper towels. Then I have gloves because I use gloves these days. And that's it. And they're always sitting in my paint basket. And then my paint basket is actually on wheels, and it's a 3-wheel trolley bag. And so it can go up and down steps. So when I travel to Venice, then going over the canals, my little trolley bag walks up and down the steps, and it's just so easy to pull it. And inside, I can also put my easel slot it down inside. So the only thing I'm really carrying is my huge palette with all the colors out of it on it, and my canvas. If my canvas is larger than a 12 by 16, which often it is, a 20 by 24 or larger, then I can carry my canvas and my palette in my left hand and pull my trolley bag in the right hand.
When you travel, when you fly overseas or on the airlines, does all of that go into checked luggage as well? Mm. I know it sounds like a dumb question, but I'm trying to visualize this setup going to Atlanta, like you were scheduled to be here, but as things turned out,
nowadays I've been doing so many demonstrations in Atlanta. I mean, in the U.S. across the country, that I have my own trolley bag there. But when I go to Venice, I do take my trolley bag, and it's very light. It's extremely light. And I just have it empty, and I just throw it in the overhead over my head. Okay. It's my carry-on, but I don't put anything in it because then the air hostess, is not. It doesn't bother her because it weighs probably 1 pound or 2 pounds or something, but it has nothing in it, and it just fits right into that overhead. And then I put all my paint supplies into my suitcase that is checked.
Well, Jill, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. I wish we could keep on going. I do want to mention one thing. You wrote a book. Tell us about that book and where it can be bought.
You cannot buy it on Amazon, but you can go directly to my website and buy it. And I have all my books here. It's in its second printing. They're here, and I can autograph it and write a little something in it for you. You can buy it directly on my website. It is called Art, Soul, and Destiny, an artist's journey from America to Provence. And a lot of my creative writings, it has my own poetry, prose, and letters about the creative process and my autobiographical writings in it. So the whole book has been written by me, and it's a 30-year retrospective of my work. And many people, even men, have told me how much they read it from cover to cover and enjoyed it. So I think it's a readable art book, which very few are. My website is artinprovence.com or jillsteenhuis.com.
Well, I'll provide links to all of those in the show notes for this episode. Jill, what a pleasure to talk with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience.
Well, you were very patient to wade through all my long responses. Thank you so much, Carl.
It was my pleasure. I'd do it again in a heartbeat.
Thank you so much.
When I recorded that session with Jill, I think that's one of the fastest hour I have ever experienced. And that's not to paint all the other guests in a bad light. That's not the case at all. I've enjoyed speaking with everyone, but there was just something about Jill and her exuberance. It was a very metaphor-rich conversation, that's for sure. It really helped crystallize in my mind, to visualize in my mind, her thought processes into the way she creates art, the way she approaches art. Just a fascinating story. It was just a lot of fun. I enjoyed speaking with Jill, and I think it probably came through in our conversation there. So you can check out Jill's website at artinprovence.com. The link is in the show notes. Also check out her book, Art, Soul, and Destiny, An Artist's Journey from America to Provence. That's also available on her website, and I'll provide a link to that as well. You can also see her work that's being exhibited as part of the Olmsted Plein Air Invitational Reimagined. That goes on until July 31st of this year. There is a gallery page just for her, and I'll provide a link to that. I want to take a moment to acknowledge some feedback that I have received since the last episode came out. This one's from Karen Warner. She says, I just want to tell you how much I enjoy your podcast. I listen in the morning with my coffee as I putz around in my kitchen. It's a great way to begin my day focused on art. You interview artists I want to hear, and you ask great questions. I appreciate the fact that you're actually having a dialogue with the artist, asking deeper questions as the conversation develops. I've been painting for about 13 years. Your podcast helped me feel not quite so isolated. As I listen, I hear new ideas, but also thoughts and feelings that I have experienced. It makes me feel a part of a large community of artists. Thank you again, and please keep up the good work. Thank you, Karen. I very much appreciate that. The next one's from Debbie Mueller. She says, your podcast is a joy. You have a way of conversing with your guests that is so genuine, kind, respectful, and enjoyable. I take something away from each interview that you do. By not sticking to a rote formula, you allow the conversations to travel to unexpected and delightful destinations. I'm about to leave my job of 15 years for a new opportunity that will allow me more time to paint and learn. I'm excited to see how consistent sleep, reduced stress levels, and the added time impact my work. My new job is farther away from home, so keep up the podcast. I have a long commute and need the company. Hope we can meet in person someday. Debbie, thank you very much for your kind comments there, and congratulations on having a new opportunity that allows you more time to paint. That's exciting, and I wish you the best. Now, I'm going to do something. I know Debbie did not ask me to do this, but I'm going to do it. The next email comes all the way from the Netherlands, Jack Eickhoff. He says, hi, Carl. I've been very much enjoying your podcast and the lineup of artists you've featured. Thanks for putting in the time and energy to create this valuable content for artists like me who are just starting out. In particular, I've had my eye on a few of your reading essentials for my next trip back to Seattle. And he mentions some of the books that he has purchased since then and has traveled with. And then he concludes by saying, thanks again for the podcast and inspiration. Jeff, I want to thank you for taking the time to contact me and giving me that feedback. It means a lot to me, and I very, very much appreciate it. Now, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge my associate producers, people who financially support the Artful Painter with their generous donations. I have a new donor. This one is from Jeff Eickhoff, whose feedback I just read earlier. He has expressed his appreciation for the show, and he's really taken it to the next level by offering a generous donation. So thank you very much for that, Jeff. I really appreciate it. So the associate producers for this year is Jeff Eickhoff, Colleen White, Alan Bloom, Jim McVicker, and Frank Wash. If you would like to join that list of associate producers, all you have to do is go to carlolson.tv/donate. Anything that you can provide, it'll be appreciated, so thank you. I love hearing from everyone. If you want to send me a note, ask a question, just tell me what you're doing. I would love to hear from you. Go to my website at carlolson.tv and click the Contact tab. Thank you for listening to The Artful Painter. I'll see you in the next episode.
Picture on the TV.